one of the beauties of climbing and mountaineering and all these things we're talking about, they are very accessible to start as an adult too. And I would think the vast majority of people actually do find their passion in these sports as adults. So, while I started with talking about like these kid experiences, and I hope, more and more kids are getting these opportunities, no one should shy away from entering this sport as an adult. They are very accessible, and some of the best climbers in the world didn't really enter until, much later in their teen years or 20s or whatever it might be. Hello and welcome to the Duffel Shuffle. I'm Adrian Ballinger, and we're here to discuss the world of climbing and skiing in all its forms through the eyes of mountain guides.
And I'm Sam Keykeper. In each episode, we'll unpack exhilarating stories, share invaluable insights, and get up close and personal with some of the most experienced and passionate guides and athletes in the industry.
Whether you're a seasoned alpinist or a weekend warrior, the Duffel Shuffle is your ticket to the thrilling world of climbing, skiing, and mountaineering. Join us.
Welcome back, episode 60 of the Duffel Shuffle podcast. Pretty wild. We're at 60. I don't know why that feels like a monumental number.
It's definitely, we're definitely 2 years in since we've done every 2 weeks for we've never missed one. 60. Congratulations.
Right on.
We should have a drink together.
I think we should go on like a surf trip to Nicaragua, but
Well, I got news for you. You missed the plane. I'm in Nicaragua.
what are you doing in Nicaragua?
This is a really fun one. We're surfing. Probably doesn't surprise you. We came down with another family. They have an 8-year-old. We have a 3-year-old. We rented a house on the beach, and we're all surfing every day. We're just down here for a week. And, me and Emily are really trying to get to be better surfers. We all decided, this friend group decided we wanted to go somewhere none of us had ever been before. So we're kind of researching, but it's only a week. So we didn't want the big time change of Fiji or Sri Lanka or somewhere like that. And so we've done a lot. We've been to a lot of spots in Central America and a lot of spots in Mexico, and no one had been to Nicaragua. It's, recently become much more stable and open for travel again. So it's kind of like the most affordable, or one of the most affordable of the Central American countries, and one of the least crowded. So we picked this spot, and it's been incredible. Our biggest fear was it was going to be too big for us. Summer swell season in Nicaragua is just known as being really big. And luckily we're between swells. There's been this epic summer apparently of really big swell all through May and June. And then coming next week is the biggest swell of the year. And we just caught this little period where none of the locals are even surfing because it's too small for them. And meanwhile, we're horrified by the size, but it means we can actually go to the main breaks instead of having to go to the protected beginner breaks. We've been able to go out with a local coach guide that we hired to some of the famous named breaks and surf them in size that's workable for us. So it's amazing. I'm getting thrashed. I can barely turn my neck. My shoulders are killing me, and I'm having so much fun.
And, you sent me some photos to just really rub it in. They look like pretty good size waves, good shape. Are you getting better?
We definitely, I'd say I'm definitely getting better, but not this is the problem of doing something a week a year. We all know it from our clients. But I think it's great to actually put ourselves in that position too. I get better through each trip, but then I go home and don't do it for 6 months. And then I start, maybe not all the way back where I was, but definitely not where I was when I left. So we're kind of in that process. Em and I took a month after our wedding 5 years ago and surfed for a month in Panama every day for a month. And we got so much better. And I've never reached that point again. Oh. And also right now, there's this funny thing of at least the first couple of days, it's starting to get better. But my level of like fatigue and soreness also kind of balances out because I'm not efficient yet. Emily, of course, just never gets tired. So she doesn't experience the same like drop off at the end of each session that I am. But yeah, it's like we just need to move somewhere and surf for a year or two, I think, to actually like ingrain it in the same way that some of the other sports we do are ingrained.
Yeah. And, we've talked about boat stuff quite a bit because we spent a little bit of time on the lake here in Tahoe. In your perspective, is there any translation between spending time surfing behind a wake boat and actually surfing in the ocean?
100% yes. Like the actual board skills, especially since a board behind the boat is so much more finicky, so much more touchy. And the wave is ultimately has like, in many ways, it's much smaller than what we're surfing in the ocean. So much of the, once I'm standing on a board and riding, I actually have a pretty decent amount of comfort and just wish I was on a smaller board that was like more turny. But the reading the wave, being in the correct position, watching the waves, and also my pop up, like those are still skills that you don't practice any of those behind a boat. And that's really where my weakness lies.
Yep, no doubt. Well, sounds like a good time. I'm in for the next trip.
It is so much fun, and it's a nice break. Like we've been pretty focused on rock climbing the past couple months, and it's been really fun. But it's hard when you're rock climbing to take breaks from rock climbing because like you feel like you need to maintain and you should be out there and all these things. And this is like a forced break. We decided not to bring like hangboards and chalk and all the stuff we normally travel with. So we're taking a legitimate 1 week break from anything to do with rock climbing. And like I'm excited to come home and rock climb again, which is like a good feeling. So
yeah, I like how your wife Emily claimed it was the summer of trail running, yet I feel like she's been rock climbing just as much as always.
Totally, she's just added trail running on top.
Yeah.
What's going on at home? What are we missing?
It's funny, the weather this summer has been funky. We're in this kind of monsoonal moisture. We had rain in the middle of the night the other night, went to bed, full clear skies. 2 a.m. it was raining till 7 a.m. and then cleared up. And today we've got another kind of cloudy day. So, I think global weirding is just continuing to throw us new things and new wrinkles. And, Chile had this monstrous historic storm, and we're having moisture up here on the other side of the hemisphere as well. And it's been kind of nice. It's a little bit of a change, and it only lasts for a few days, and then we get nice sunny warm Tahoe weather again. But life is good, hard to beat it. Makes the mountain biking really good, which just means I'm not climbing at all.
Sounds about right. The only way I've sort of noticed that is when I was home last week, we were obviously in the lake, and the lake was still in like the mid 60s, and I would just expect it to be in the 70s by now. I think part of that is probably has to do with this like cooler summer and some rain and things like that. The other thing that I think is interesting about that, like knock on wood, but like we're having a great wildfire smoke summer so far. It's very, very early. But I was in New York last week, straight before coming here, and it was like full apocalyptic, couldn't see the top of the skyscrapers through the Canadian wildfire smoke that's been hitting the East Coast and Midwest this year. We're just so used to wildfire smoke and living in it, and we had those bad years, but the graphs are really interesting of like actually the Midwest and the East are being much more affected by smoke than California for the past few years. And Colorado also has been having a really tough summer. So a lot to say. I think we've had a lot of luck. There's been a lot of fire starts around. Obviously, I spent a lot of time at the airport. There's been a lot of fire starts, loads of fire activity from the crews that are based in Truckee. But they've been getting them all out, and I'm just hoping it continues. It's a I guess all I'd say, it's a good summer for Tahoe this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And the fire thing is an interesting one. I mean, I think the weather and the climate certainly play a major role, but I also think, sadly, a lot of California has burned, and there's not a lot of unburned large swath of forest that can really generate some of those mega fires that we saw. And so, I'm not discrediting the weather impact at all. Certainly, if you have dry fuels, it's going to spark and grow faster. But I also think that we maybe have like reached the top of the bell curve on some of that, and there's fewer and fewer large swaths that are still, able to burn.
I like that theory, despite the devastation we've seen in the couple of tough summers. I like that theory. I know how important burning the forest is, and like if we are actually in a slightly better place today, like the sounds of that.
Yeah. Well, what do you have for
Let's
the
see.
week?
Well, I'll just bring us down after all that stoke, like we always try to not do too sad stories, but I think this story, I mean, of course it's sad, but it's also like, to me, it's more like just always on this podcast wanting to share the realness of our sports and what we do. And what kind of caught my eye this week, we're obviously in the middle of a season for climbing in the northern hemisphere, and we spent a lot of time talking about the Himalaya. I'm not going to talk about the Himalaya today, but I'm thinking like in our like home countries and a bit more locally where we spend a lot of time. So like Europe, US, South America. This is like a really South America, obviously Southern Hemisphere, but it's a big climbing season for us down there in Peru and Bolivia through the summer. And there's been a series of accidents on really famous, what I would call like trade route peaks and trade routes. In Europe, on Mont Blanc, there were 2 fatalities, one guide, one client. On the normal like Goûter route on Mont Blanc, they were climbing through the Death Couloir or the bowling alley, great names, which is an area of known rockfall that has regular accidents through the climbing season, and can get so bad where the government's actually shut down the climbing route for periods of time. So 2 deaths there. In Peru, Huascarán, the tallest peak in Peru, has a normal route, and there have been 2 separate accidents that killed 4 climbers. A porter down low in the icefall was called the Garganta while carrying a load up to high camp, with 2 others injured in that accident. And then really sadly, a guide and 2 clients, a group of 3 close to the summit. It sounds like probably got lost in a whiteout, were probably out too late, got caught in a storm, and most likely fell into a crevasse. Probably one didn't see it, pulled the other 2 in. And so they're still officially missing, but rescue crews have been looking for them for a number of days. And again, on a normal route. And then as we started recording today, reports are coming out of a rockfall accident on Mount Rainier. I don't have too many details yet, but it sounds like probably non-guided climbers. A group was affected by rockfall. And I think there was 1 fatality and possibly some other additional injuries on the normal route, the Disappointment Cleaver route on Rainier. And so this for me like triggers a couple of different things. One is mostly just, we've talked a lot about this, like these accidents are quote unquote normal, and normal not just for today, but over many years. Like lots of climbers climbing these normal routes. Climbing is still dangerous. Some of these easiest routes have very specific, kind of like the icefall on the south side of Mount Everest. Like the Disappointment Cleaver is a dangerous route for rockfall. The Goûter route on Mont Blanc is a dangerous route for rockfall. But they're the easiest routes, and so they see the most traffic. So I think remembering like these sports are dangerous, hiring guides probably maximizes the chance of making the right decisions around this hazard, but certainly doesn't mean that the sports aren't dangerous still. And then a big thing for me is just how much more connected we are now. Like now, if the algorithm knows you like climbing in the mountains, you're going to see all these accidents in your feed, whatever your feed is, Twitter or Instagram or Meta or TikTok, or your news app. And so it becomes easy, I think, to think the sports are getting a lot more dangerous. So there's so many more climbers and so many more accidents. I think statistics actually mostly show that that's not the case, but that we just hear about all the accidents now that you wouldn't have heard of if you weren't in the country back in the day. The last note, of course, two of those accidents being rockfall, we have to consider, climate change. Is there an increase in the likelihood of those things? And while I'm saying it might just be that we're hearing more about the accidents, certainly the Mont Blanc incident, immediately professionals in the area came out and said this is directly a result of climate change and increased rockfall as the permafrost goes away in the high mountains of the Alps. So I don't want to discount that position from the professionals who are actually there. Um, I just wonder if at the same time we also become smarter, better as guides, better at our jobs with more tools in place to use to mitigate that risk. And so I'm not sure the actual number of fatalities, the fatality rate is going up.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think your point around the statistics and the transfer of information around accidents like this is a really interesting one. And I think one of the tough things is we're still talking about, a fairly low percentage of climbers are in these accidents, right? And so, how many people climbed Mont Blanc this summer and how many people were in an accident associated with rockfall? It's a very, very small percentage. And I would be curious. I think it's probably not possible to look at just individual seasons or even like multiple seasons in a row to compare the statistics. But like in the past 20 years, have there been more accidents on a percentage basis than the previous 20 or the previous 20 before that? And, it's an interesting one to consider, and it makes you wonder if these kind of regular routes that we're seen as the easy routes now need to be shifted, or
Yes.
if new regular routes should be explored because, even if the statistical percentages aren't increasing, these accidents still, are not good for people adventuring in the mountains, right? And so we need to find ways to manage them. And I think to your point, guiding is a great way to limit your risk as much as possible. But at the same time, these are still objective risks. And in some of these accidents, guides were involved, and that is a little bit of the nature of being in the mountains. But I'm curious if we start to see more of a shift in the regular routes, because I feel like that hasn't been the case as much as I would have thought.
Well, I think you bring up a really interesting point. I mean, ultimately, like I hope these routes ultimately aren't closed by governments, for example. Like I think we should be able to go out and take the level of risk we choose. Once there's commercialization and money involved, obviously, I think the government should have more say in it. But this idea of like shifting normal routes, maybe the lesson is just like choose your guide wisely, and ultimately you need to choose a guide or a guide company whose level of conservatism around risk matches your own or what your expectation is as a client. And that takes a lot of like research and understanding. It's not an easy thing to figure out based on everyone's pretty websites, who's got like more risk, tolerance versus less. But like Alpenglow, for instance, stopped guiding the normal route on Huascarán almost a decade ago because we saw a trend, not a single accident, but a trend of like multiple accidents or close calls per year over a period of years as the Garganta got more dangerous. So we kept guiding a much more dangerous route called the Shield, the Escudo, a much more difficult route. So we needed a much higher level of client, but we could summit safely and avoid the icefall. Of course, we all know on Everest, that's exactly what Alpenglow did, stopped guiding the south side and guided the north side while the icefall felt just untenable in terms of risk. And on Mont Blanc, as an individual certified guide who used to guide Mont Blanc a lot, I stopped guiding the Goûter route, despite it being the easiest route, because of the death couloir and the close calls the friends were having. They had to live there the whole season, and I was dropping in for a month at a time or 3 weeks at a time, not knowing it as well. I just decided it wasn't worth it to me and would only guide Mont Blanc by the Cosmiques route, the 3 Mont Blanc summit route, it's called. And again, significantly more difficult route, longer day, but significantly reduces the hazard. All that to say, like, these decisions are being made by individual guides and guide companies. And it's up to clients to sort of ferret out a guide who fits their risk tolerance.
Yeah. And I think it brings up a great point. And to the guides out there, like, it's okay to not guide certain routes or certain climbs or certain places. The example for me is I climbed the Couts Glacier on Rainier just personally. and we did an up and over and came down the Disappointment Cleaver. And, I'm walking down the Cleaver where this rockfall accident happened, and you've got loose rock above the Cleaver and the trail goes right across the top. And then you've got, the trail goes right underneath it. And I thought to myself, there's no way I'm ever guiding this because it's an odds thing. You're just too exposed and it's a little bit out of your control. No matter how good of a guide you are, it's an objective hazard that can't really be managed because other people are out there. And so, I've had opportunities to guide Rainier that I've turned down because to me, that's just out of my level of comfort. And that's for both myself personally and my clients. And so, for guides out there, stick to your guns. Don't get forced into something you're not comfortable with.
Good message. I like it. And those challenging conversations are exactly what strong guide companies and guide groups should be having on a regular basis with a chief guide or infrastructure to help make sure it stays professional and kind of the best decisions come out, and they change, right? Like Mount Rainier, I think last year or the year before, the guide companies all stopped guiding the Cleaver. These decisions shouldn't be static. They're going to be different every year and every season. And it takes strong leadership to make those hard decisions that essentially are very, very expensive when you make them.
Yep, no doubt. Well, I got a fun one too. I just saw a news story that the FAA has greenlit the use of drones for avalanche mitigation in the U.S. And this is a big one. We've talked a lot about drones. Drones with bombs. Yeah, it's
wow.
It's a big one. We've talked a lot about the use of drones in the mountains in terms of route finding, like on the biggest ski descents in the Himalaya. We've talked about it in the use of search and rescue. And so this company, I just lost the web page, but
while you pull it up, and carrying loads on Everest,
totally
significantly reducing the hazard of the Khumbu ice fall by load carrying to reduce Sherpa trips. Incredible use of drones.
Absolutely. So, this is kind of a next step. Like, as you joked, drones carrying bombs it's a level up from the use of drones in the mountains in our use cases. So this company Drone Amplified has a drone called the Montis, and they've been testing it up in Alaska, and the FAA gave them permission to start using it around the US for avalanche mitigation. And I think what's interesting about this is the drone obviously has a lot of capability in terms of different type of deployments. So they can do an air blast, they can do they can drop bombs into slopes, they can move things around, and it's a pretty cool and dynamic use. But obviously airspace is complicated in the US, and this as a pilot. And so drones have their own limitations, but they're starting to fall under FAA control. And as you joked again, carrying explosives is a little different than just like a drone with a camera on it flying around. And so, I'm really curious to see, obviously the approval by the FAA is a huge step, but, people adopting this technology and starting to integrate it, whether it's for primary use or backup use, is going to be an interesting thing, and see how it's adopted in the US. I think, there's obvious, easy use cases, like in my mind, Little Cottonwood Canyon. It's got tons of avalanche paths that run right over a road. The Department of Transportation has different ways to mitigate and manage that. And the use of a drone really can eliminate the need for helicopters. And the con for a helicopter is that you need flyable weather. And I think the parameters around flyable weather for a drone are much different than a helicopter with humans inside. And so those use cases are obvious ones, and I think slam dunks for this technology. The use case that I'm more curious about is like a ski area, whether that's on Forest Service land or private land. Will a ski area bring this technology into their repertoire and start to use it? GazX, which are remote detonated explosives that are fixed positioned on mountains, have really come into the mountains and into these ski areas infrastructures quickly, I would say. Now, a lot of ski areas have GazX exploders around their mountains and different rack systems. And so will they start to add this drone technology? I'm really curious to see.
Oh, I love this story. I mean, I'm like a tech weenie and I guess like lean in the techno optimist direction. And I think, new tools that are going to come out are going to just change our world in really positive ways. Of course, we need to manage those tools effectively, but like this to me is an example of like, absolutely, it seems like we should be able to make avalanche mitigation safer through drone usage. There's so many examples in Europe of like where primary avalanche mitigation is done by helicopter, like you mentioned, and not just for roads, but for ski areas. I think in the US, someone can correct me in the comments, but like in the US, Silverton might be the only resort that does the majority of their avalanche mitigation from heli, is because they have a heli program and their own heli, and they've been able to get permission for that. But it's just from my experience in Andamán, it's such an effective tool that while there's risk with helicopters, which is certainly very real, and especially helicopters and explosives, like it's probably less risk than having people on snow. We've seen accidents in Palisades and Mammoth, and of course, so many other resorts of ski patrollers during avalanche mitigation work. It's my understanding is it continues to be dangerous work. For me, my understanding of where drone tech is going and has already gone based on military usage and things like that. Like whatever you think of the military usage, imagine like so much of our cool technology in the mountains, like GPS, comes from military technology that has been repurposed for the consumer, for the general population. And this just seems so natural to me that we should be able to reduce risk for our ski patrollers and heli crews. And hopefully as it like improves, that will therefore like make avalanche mitigation more efficient, faster, which means more of it can be done under the same budget, and which ultimately makes inbound mountains potentially safer. And I think we're on the same page. We want inbound mountains to be as safe as humanly possible.
Yeah.
So this story totally excites me, and there's almost no way I can't see, a few years from now it being a standard tool in the toolbox of a ski resort.
Well, some interesting kind of additions for you that your comments there. Palisades had a tragic explosives related accident in 2017. And the following season, the season of 2017-18, they actually leased a helicopter and it was parked on the preferred parking roof, for the whole season for the sole use of avalanche mitigation and, rescue needs. And what was wild is that helicopter actually, I think, was only used maybe a few times, a couple training days and once or twice for avalanche mitigation, because the weather requirements to fly with explosives during the time in which avalanche mitigation occurred with light, all the factors, it actually wasn't as useful of a tool as they thought it could be. And I think
you imagine a drone could just have everything mapped and it's all automated and it flies the exact same route every single day, drops the exact same payloads or however it's doing it. Like, just you would take away that risk. And it's a good point. Like in Europe, where helicopter use is so common for avalanche mitigation, I think like it's important to know that the mountains in Europe just don't open mid-storm. Like we could stand in the KT line and hear all these complaints that the mountain took this many hours to open in the storm, or these lifts open and these didn't. Like in Europe, the resort just doesn't open until the storm cycle's done and the avalanche level is at least below a 4 or below. It can't be a 5. In some places, it can be a 4. And then they go out and do the work on the first bluebird day, and you get access to this terrain at noon or whatever it might be. So you're absolutely right of that limitation of helicopters and the uniqueness of the US, the expectation that like the mountain opens no matter the weather and things like that.
Yeah. So excited to see the use of this. I think DOT will probably be the first use, just being tied to the government and federal use. But I certainly think that private ski resorts, the pathway has now been opened for private ski resorts to start using this technology. And hopefully it not only increases safety, but it also increases efficiency for the ski areas.
Yes. Yep. It's us skiing powder faster.
Exactly.
Let's go. Great news story. That one, I didn't catch that one. I'm so glad you did. Excited to see what happens.
Well, coming up, we have a great conversation about how to get into climbing. I think we talk about a lot about like high level climbing in the Himalaya, climbing even in Ecuador. And, we haven't talked a lot about the path. And, a lot of our listeners enjoy this activity or enjoy hearing about this activity, but don't actually do it themselves. And we want to encourage everyone to get out there and start climbing. And so Adrian and I had a great conversation about what are the steps, and from the very entry level, no experience at all, how to get into climbing and what our recommendations around the steps are for that. So hope you enjoy it and stay tuned.
We'll miss you in Nicaragua.
Welcome back to the Duffel Shuffle podcast. We are talking today for the newbies out there. We're talking about how to get into climbing. So I guess this would be for the newbies, but also like maybe you're a rock climber and you want to get into high altitude mountaineering. Maybe this podcast applies to you. So, Adrian, I wanted to kick things off by just hearing a little bit about how you got into climbing way back in the day. You were a rollerblader that transitioned to climbing. So tell us a little bit about, what brought you into climbing, and then maybe a little bit about like the different points where you expanded your climbing repertoire.
My climbing journey. Obviously, this is like one of the most common questions I get is like, especially how to become a mountain guide or how to become an 8,000 meter peak climber, how to get to Everest. The reality is there is like, I'm very clear there are incredibly more resources today than there were when I was growing up. At the same time, the path is not easy because I think both of us will probably agree that at a certain point, mentorship becomes really important, and that can be it can often be challenging because either it's very possible through professional mountain guiding, but it's expensive, so there's a need to make an income that allows for funding a guiding mentorship relationship, or it takes kind of, I think, luck to find the right community to slowly build trust in the community, and then finally to find that right person that gives you that opportunity and that experience to build. The reason I start with that when talking about my experience is really that's why I am so fortunate to be where I am today, and that when I look back, I see a lot of luck in my path, as well as, of course, hope. I'd like to believe I set myself up to be open to be luck, to be in the right position of luck through choices. But really, my path into climbing was through a series of mentors in a community. I had no money to spend on guides or camps or knolls or outbound early on or any of those things. So my path started when I was 12 years old, about that my one of my best friends growing up, his name was Greg. You've probably met him with me at my wedding and other places. Like his dad started teaching him and me and a couple other boys like from our school to climb. And so, in those early years, teen pre-driving, I started, we were all skiers already because we lived walking distance from a ski hill. So we were skiers. And then we had these little completely crappy rock climbing crags in Massachusetts, Central Mass, Leominster State Park, a place called Crow Hill, where we started learning to rock climb. First top roping and then lead climbing from, this one dad and then other sort of community members and things like that. That then led to early trips going to the White Mountains in New Hampshire. Again, as kids, they couldn't drive yet. Starting to have our first little experiences, which felt like huge adventures, basically hiking up hills that we thought were big mountains. Because when you grow up in New England, the White Mountains are the biggest mountains. So how did that was my path where I started. Then kind of found that I really liked these things alongside all the like normal mainstream sports I was doing. So I became obsessed. And by the time we had driver's licenses, we were always going to New Hampshire to go climbing. And we started doing things like Mount Washington winter climbs when I was 15 or 16. And like those, it turns out, were really dangerous and really serious, but we kind of didn't know any better. And we were just going out and we were failing way more than we were succeeding. Like if we tried Mount Washington 6 times, I think we probably got up it once, like but we were building experience of like how to stay alive in the mountains and just like loving the suffering of it. So those sort of things gave me a base. Then I went to college in DC and there was an outdoor program. And this is the way I still see a lot of people getting into the sports is through college outdoor rec programs. So colleges obviously have club sports. We have lots of activities. Everyone knows it's really important to find communities in college. And pretty much every college in the United States, I bet, has some sort of outdoor recreation program. At some schools, it might actually be 4 credit. At some schools, it's more like PE, like phys ed type stuff. At some schools, it's might be more hiking focused. At some schools, it's more rock climbing focused. At some schools, it's more water, like rafting and kayaking focused, depending on what the strengths are. But almost every school has them. And like I was up on Donna Summer rock climbing 2 days ago, and like the crag we went to was like overrun by Stanford kids in the best way possible, right? Like Gumbies, newbies, whatever you want to call them, strong
like
gym climbers. Yeah. Right. No, he wasn't. But there were some really, really strong kids who obviously had a lot of gym time and were now climbing outside. There was some kids with loads of outdoor experience. And then there was some that seemed a lot newer. And I bet if we drove around all the crags in Tahoe and all the hiking spots and all the water spots, we would see kids from Chico State, Stanford, UC Berkeley, University Nevada, Reno. Like they're all out using these things, and they're just totally set up as like mentorship programs. Like the kids with a bit more experience or more years in the outdoors club are teaching the newer kids and stuff like that. So I think the fact that my experience through one of those clubs happened to be being led by a famous at the time, back in the 90s, you didn't really get famous climbing mountains, but like famous high altitude mountaineer, which gave me opportunities to start going to places like Ecuador and Peru through his leadership. But the same thing is happening all over the country in climbing and skiing. So my path in many ways, I think, was a very traditional path, like through a kid's friend. And then we didn't have climbing gyms back then, but today, I think I guess the other thing worth mentioning, and then I'll stop and we could chat about these. But the other place is like, I don't think there's a kid out there now who hasn't at least tried climbing through climbing gyms or a birthday party or a climbing wall at a event. That none of that existed when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s. But today, that's obviously a huge way people are getting into climbing. And I think many of our listeners probably think like, when I mean climbing, I mean mountains, not rock. But the reality, and so a lot of our people who go to the big mountains with us, like really don't go to climbing gyms. And I understand that, but I do want to encourage that, like, if you're looking for mentorship, if you're looking to build skills, and if you're looking for community, today in every medium tier city and bigger in the United States, there is a climbing gym with a community of passionate climbers, and a percentage of them translate to the outdoors and to mountains. So there is no better place to start still today than a climbing gym.
So, you talked about being 12-ish and starting to rock climb, and then, fast forward to your college years and you're in the outdoor club, and that's really how you kind of like found yourself in the outdoors. Would you guess that had you not had those early experiences at age 12, you might not have pursued the outdoor club in college?
Shoot, I mean, it's just so hard to say, right? Like, all the infinite different paths that our bodies could have been on, and this was mine. I mean, I tend to think, without being cosmic, like there's something about me that really connects with working hard, with a sport component, a problem solving component, an outdoors component. I'm just a lot happier outdoors than indoors, and a team aspect. Like, I think I might have found these things, but I might not have like percolated to the top to where I got the opportunities I got, right? Like this is the hard thing to know when everyone's talking about kids sports these days and club teams and all these things. And are we pushing our kids too hard? Like, and I think about all those things with my 3-year-old, like we're still early on that process, but like how we introduce sports and things like that. But there is something about, because of those early days, I then, even though I wasn't very good, I then had a skill set that caused me in the college program to percolate to the top. And that gave me opportunities like going to Ecuador when I was 17 and climbing my first 20,000 foot peaks. Like that opportunity would have gone to some other kid in the outdoors club if I hadn't have those experiences that helped me to percolate to the top. So it's for sure all linked, and who knows where I'd be without those things.
Yeah, I guess, kind of what I was getting at is those early exposures are so pivotal in some way, shape, or form. And that exposure could be anything. It could be hiking, it could be rock climbing in a gym, it could be a via ferrata, but kind of getting those tastes and those teases create this baseline skill set. And so where I kind of wanted to start is like, what are the baseline skill sets that a new climber, be it a rock climber or a high altitude climber or a mountaineer, what are those baseline skill sets that those, early stage climbers are looking to develop? And so, one of those skill sets that I kind of wanted to just dive into is like ropes and knots, right? And so ropes and knots and adding in belaying and rappelling are basic skills that have a wide range of applicability. And what is the best way in your eyes to get some of those baseline skills?
Yeah, and I guess just because of where this conversation kind of started, I guess I should also say one of the beauties of climbing and mountaineering and all these things we're talking about, they are very accessible to start as an adult too. And I would think the vast majority of people actually do find their passion in these sports as adults. So, while I started with talking about like these kid experiences, and I hope, more and more kids are getting these opportunities, no one should shy away from entering this sport as an adult. They are very accessible, and some of the best climbers in the world didn't really enter until, much later in their teen years or 20s or whatever it might be. So throw that out. And so then to your question of like where to start. Yeah. So first, I think is this group of skills you're thinking of, like technical skills, ropes, knots, belaying, kind of the safety systems in exposure. And then, I would add, because of mountains, like crampon skills, ice axe skills, really the hard skills of climbing, not so much the decision-making side. I think we'll get to that afterwards. And I think there are a number of places to gain those skills. Easy ones. We already kind of touched on a climbing gym. A climbing gym will teach some of the basics of belaying and rope skills that we use in rock climbing that is transferable to outdoor climbing, and that provides a basis for what I call our alpine skills or mountaineering skills. Even though the systems are different, having an understanding and trust of belaying, which can be built inside, it's a great way to go. Mountain guides are another great, and guiding companies, and kind of like what I would call more like school programs, mountaineering schools, or outdoor rock climbing schools, are another great way to build these basic technical skills. You're going to be outside instead of inside. It might be a little more applicable to the mountains than the indoor skills. They're still going to be quite affordable if you join group kind of skills-based programs. And they can be done in lots of different places in the United States. Obviously, I am biased. I think Tahoe is one of the best places in the United States to learn these skills, whether it's at rock climbing locations like Lover's Leap and Donner Summit in Truckee, or down the Sierra East Side or on Mount Shasta. These are all good places to learn basic skills that you're going to use throughout your career. Yeah, so guiding, I'd put really high on that list. And then mountain guide companies. And then the third place is kind of like clubs. And I think these have been really important to the growth of the sport in the United States. I immediately think of the Mountaineers in the Northwest, but I also think of the American Alpine Club and the different chapters they have throughout the country. I think of events like the Ouray Ice Festival, the Lander International Climbers Festival, ice climbing festivals all over like Black Diamond, one of the companies I work with, puts a lot of time and money into, whether it's Mount Washington in the Northeast or Michigan in the Midwest or Cody, Wyoming, lots and lots of options of these festivals are places where you can get really inexpensive beginner courses and a little bit of a taste to find out what you don't know in many ways and to kind of help you to figure out your path. So festivals and then clubs like the Mountaineers, Big City Mountaineers, an American Alpine Club. I really think the clubs do a great job of affordable ways to, number one, meet other people where you might find that mentor or those people to go and do things that are a little outside your skill set. And number two, to build some of these basic skills.
Yeah. I think clubs and those events I think are key too, because the events are a great way to get your tastes, right? And, I think getting a bunch of knowledge and information is awesome, but getting a constant taste of that information and a constant exposure is really how you can solidify a lot of these skills. A lot of people come and they do a mountaineering course, and that's one course. And then a year later, they go climb a mountain, and all that information they learned is kind of dissipated into their brain with everything else that we do as humans. And so if you're getting more constant exposure, I think it can be incredibly valuable. And so, aside from the technical component, another thing that I think takes time and takes experience is comfort and confidence in uneven terrain and with exposure. Talk a little bit about that. And I think that's kind of like an underappreciated aspect of becoming a climber, is just spending time moving through uneven terrain, not vertical rock climbing, but just challenging approach trails and exposed sections and kind of building your own internal comfort with that.
Yeah, I mean, and it's great that you bring that up. Really, like when I think of big mountains, but really across the board, the vast majority of time we spend is actually probably on the type of terrain you were talking about, kind of like approaching mountains, leaving mountains, the lower sections of mountains that are not glaciated, getting to rock climbing crags, getting off of rock climbing objectives. We're all just hikers, really, with like these technical pieces that give us the excuse for all the hiking. And it's a part where over my 30-year career of guiding, where I've seen so many people be the weakest, like be really strong on technical skills or be really strong in the gym, and then be weak in the actual walking part, which then leads to like a load of wasted energy. And so I think it's a great thing to bring up. The beauty is, again, that pretty much wherever you live in the world, you can get out and just build time moving on terrain. It's like you said, goes from, trail to then exposed, but it's kind of this middle ground before the really technical stuff, but we're not on a road in a city park or a paved trail. That's the easy part. The hard part is, I think, the thing that actually works in this environment is just massive amounts of time. It's kind of like, if you work with any of our trainers that we recommend, whether it's Lynette at Billy Goat Swift or Uphill Athlete or Scott Johnston at Evoke Endurance, basically you just need massive amounts of hours to build your like low end engine that works in the big mountains. It builds your endurance. The same is true on this type of terrain. You just need loads and loads and loads of time. Ideally. Now, of course, we can shortcut things. We're talking about the ideal. The ideal is just loads of time. And I think of that as being in a few different buckets. One would be whatever you have close to home. If you live in New York, that's like in the parks or just outside in the Hudson Valley, something like that, getting out on just trails and whatever little bumps or hills you have. Then it's starting to travel to do bigger hiking, or for me, my preference is trail running because I like moving a little bit faster, but kind of like bigger, longer days on cool loop trails in the mountains or in the desert, or picking non-technical peaks like Colorado 14ers or in the Sierra. There's so many, just run up here in Tahoe, Talac or Mount Rose or whatever it is, and you're just building loads of time on that terrain. And then the next step is kind of what I would call the scrambles. It still really fit into this. And that's where, like, I mean, actually, I think once again, with bias, we have one of the best tools in the United States, being the Tahoe Via Ferrata here in North Lake Tahoe. Like, a Via Ferrata, many people aren't familiar with them yet if you haven't spent time in Europe, but they're protected climbing routes where you're essentially clipped to a steel cable the entire time you're climbing through exposed rock climbing, scrambling terrain. They enable non-rock climbers who don't yet have the rope skills or the ability to lead technical terrain in the mountains. They allow someone with basically only hiking and walking experience to experience those high places with a high degree of safety. Basically, what they're all about is moving efficiently on technical, scrambly type terrain, using your hands occasionally, but really being very efficient on your feet. And they are so much fun. You feel like you're really, really climbing a big face or a big mountain without all the hard work to get there. And the cool thing is, in the United States, Alpenglow built a Via Ferrata here in Tahoe in, I'm going to say 2018. Yeah. Wow. God, we're going to be 10 years soon. But we were one of the very early Via Ferratas in the United States. There's thousands of Via Ferrata in Europe. There's over 100 in Canada. There's probably 24 now in the United States, with more coming. But so while Tahoe has the best one, obviously, you can go to Ouray, Colorado. You can go to Jackson Hole. You can go to Mammoth. You can go to A Basin in the Front Range of Colorado. You can go to Seneca Rocks, Nelson Rocks in West Virginia. You can go to Kentucky, to the Red River Gorge. They really are popping up there's one in Ohio now. So search Via Ferratas in your home area and find one to get out on. I think you learn a lot about how your brain works in exposed terrain. And that's another huge bucket of efficiency, is not wasting energy and kind of like the fear or unknown of being in exposed places.
Yeah, I think, it's interesting to kind of think about the progression and how that might have changed with Via Ferratas, because comfort with exposure and footwork in uneven, uncertain terrain there are two major components that are easy to kind of bypass and skip ahead of and get those technical skills. But really, the foundation of a good climber is their comfort with exposure and their footwork, and kind of having that confidence in, the approach, the descent, and also just like the unevenness of what climbing does. And, it's funny, I watch it all the time, on a mountain like Shasta, and someone will really struggle, especially in the summer, on the approach to camp. And the next day they seem good, but they're just they seem wrecked. And I think that like the talus fields and the scree and the kind of uneven terrain with a heavy pack, they expel so much energy just trying to focus on their footwork, and it's not kind of second nature and tuned yet, that the next day they're exhausted for their summit push. And they would have had great chances, but they skipped that step of having comfort and confidence in that uneven terrain. And Via Ferratas, it's a great exposure to that uneven terrain and great exposure to exposure, and getting comfortable with air underneath your feet in a way that is very secure and, safe, even though we don't like to use that word.
Yep. Yeah, hands down. I mean, I feel like, over the thousands of climbers I've gotten to climb with, there's a large portion of, I get a sense of how someone's going to move on their entire expedition in the first hour on a trail. The good news about that part is, like, basically what we're saying is like this piece that is so important is actually highly developable pretty much everywhere, not only in the beautiful mountain communities that like you and I live in, that a lot of people only get to go to a couple of times a year, even if they're really passionate about these sports. But a lot of that, just like learning how to move efficiently and not waste energy, can be developed anywhere through trail running and hiking on uneven terrain and trails. I guess the other piece I'd throw in there is like, don't just cherry pick the best days. Like, kind of going all the way back to my foundation, I think a part of why I was so easily able to move into the suffering of high altitude and the unknowns and the failure and the ass kickings is because by never choosing the best day because I was a teenager and didn't, care about such things like looking at weather forecasts. Like I basically was out on so many terrible days, and there are terrible days in New Hampshire, of course. There are terrible days like in the Mid-Atlantic. I went to school in DC, and go outside on an August 110-degree day with black flies everywhere, like, 100% humidity, and you're trying to like scramble up some silly peak called Old Rag in Virginia or whatever, West Virginia. Like you just get the shit kicked out of you and you screw up your nutrition, and the roots and rocks are all slippery from the moisture, and the thunderstorm comes and tries to kill you. And like all that stuff is actually, you're just building experience through all of it. So, while I don't want anyone to get struck by lightning, it's like go out on the terrible days just as much as you go out on the perfect days, because that's what's building this like ability to deal with discomfort and uncertainty.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I'm a shitty climber, right? Like born and raised in California where it's always perfect days. I haven't had to suffer enough.
Seriously, I just went to Montana last week for Protect Our Winter Summit, which was incredible. We were in Glacier National Park, but we were, camping, and it's mid-May, and all of a sudden it like rained every day and it snowed, and like I had like this like ultralight 2-pound 3-season tent, which is like the most I would ever bring into the Sierra pretty much. Normally I'd have no tent at all. Like I didn't have a Gore-Tex jacket. I just had a little soft shell because that's all we would possibly need in the Sierra. And I just like spent 3 days like wet and uncomfortable. I was like, oh yeah, we're really spoiled.
We are really spoiled.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Alpenglow Expeditions, a Tahoe-based guide company with an international reputation. In its 20th year of operations, Alpenglow leads the highest quality expeditions in some of the world's greatest mountain ranges, from California's High Sierra to the rugged Himalaya. Alpenglow runs more than 40 international expeditions per year, as well as offering a full menu of guided ski and climbing courses throughout California. Join us and experience the Alpenglow difference.
So, one thing that I hear from people a lot is, they go to a climbing gym, they get these basic technical skills, they spend time trail running and hiking and maybe doing a via ferrata, and they get these kind of like tastes of, that footwork development and exposure. And then they go on some guided adventures and they feel like they were a good guided client, but they can't get over the hump of like always being someone that needs a guide with them for those decisions and, leading the group. Talk a little bit about the significance of that role in someone's development and how to kind of get over the hump of like going out always with a guide to starting to have some of these experiences out on your own.
Sure. I mean, it's kind of a big topic, which is kind of the point. One thing I'd say is like sort of to the more European model, there's nothing at all wrong with all of your mountain adventures being guided. I think that's fantastic. And especially if you're only going to go 2 weeks a year or something like that, or a couple of adventures a year because you're busy and maybe your family doesn't do this with you or whatever it might be. But like with that limited amount of time, if you want to maximize your experience, it makes a load of sense to be with a mountain guide who knows the season snowpack, who knows the weather in and out and how you can sneak in these days, who's going to make sure you don't screw up your logistics, and who's going to let you push out of your comfort zone in a way that you wouldn't be able to on your own with that limited time. So, first and foremost, like, I think that's fantastic. And I think the key is develop relationships with individual mountain guides or through a mountain guide company like Alpenglow. So each of your once every 6 month experiences actually can build on each other. If you just go to a new location around the world and hire a random guide each time, you're going to be limited on the progression. I mean, this is no different than when I go and hire flight instructors. Each time I start with a new one, they're of course going to start at a totally different level or goal to make sure that we build trust. And if I only have 3 hours of lessons with that person, well, I've just begun to build trust when like now I reset and go to a new one. So for me, if you are in this like guiding rotation, I encourage you to like build a relationship with a company and potentially even an individual guide in one company so you can build. And Alpenglow thinks a lot about this. A lot of our guiding work is built around like obviously our guides are what makes Alpenglow so incredible. We want to develop relationships between individual climbers and their guides, whether on group trips or private trips, to be able to continue building a progression and an enjoyment of the mountains through that relationship. And we're actually exploring ways of like, is it memberships or other things that can actually help a client, a member feel really a part of this team through a whole year or years instead of having these one-off standalone experiences. So that's not an answer to your direct question, but I think it's really important. And actually, I think probably like 70% of people who do these things will be primarily in that area, in that model. Now, with that said, the best clients of mountain guides are the ones who are able to be additive to both the decision making in mountains, to truly understand what's going into that process and be able to add a voice and have an opinion, and when things go wrong, to truly be able to like help as a partner as well as a client in a client guide relationship. And so we at Alpenglow spend a lot of time focusing on that. Like we always talk about, like we don't just drag people to summits. We're trying to build competent partners in the mountains. We want you to be a competent partner in the mountain, even if that doesn't mean you can go and do things independently. The way to become a competent partner on a big objective is one, to go through a lot of this guiding and build a lot of experience and have a lot of like things happen to you in the mountains. And I do think an ideal second like piece of that puzzle is to go out and do things where you're not being guided and have to make the decisions on your own completely. But my recommendation is that those things are done at a level of consequence that you feel comfortable with. And so to me, that almost leads back to what we were talking about, like going hiking on your own, whether it's Colorado 14ers or trails around your house or on the desert or Grand Canyon or whatever it might be. Those are actually those objectives where you're building that decision-making without a mountain guide. And they're just so helpful. And if that connects with you, that you really love that like uncertainty, then that's another pathway to kind of go on, is to start to bite off a little more and a little more and a little more, like possibly going to mountains on your own, whether they're Shastas or Eastern Sierras or things in the Tetons, Colorado, Washington State. Baker's a really famous one, Hood, the different volcanoes. To start doing things unguided is an incredible pathway to go down. I think it's just really important to know what you don't know and to know how much time you get to prioritize this or not, and have a very conservative mindset, especially if you're the most experienced one on the team. If you've found a mentor or friends where they have more experience than you, then maybe that level can start pushing towards what you might do in a guided level. But that's really what I think about, is like guided, you get to try really audacious things with limited experience. Unguided, you want to choose very appropriate objectives for your level of experience in your team.
Yeah, I think one thing I often talk to people about, and a way that I think about that is there's two kind of parts to the equation on an adventure like that. One is the technical challenge, and the other is the complexity challenge. And I think that when you can up the ante on the complexity challenge, you learn and develop so much. And what I mean by that is, going to a new area. So you have to learn the weather forecast, and you have to learn the scale and the size of the mountains and the quality of the trail building, and how you might want to manage your apparel. Changing all of those aspects, you develop a lot. When people go on trips and they have to make equipment decisions on their own, even if they're not technical equipment decisions, they start to learn the the best way to pair their layers and how to manage their internal temperature and how to fuel and how to, consume water at, the right times for their body. And they build all these skills that seem somewhat simple. But when you bring those skills to an added technical challenge with a guide on a bigger objective, you then can focus your efforts on that technical challenge because you've tuned all those kind of side skills in such a great way by upping the complexity of trips and of your training in a sense that really, like you said, makes you a better client.
Absolutely. 100%. And then the other thing I'd say is like, I'm now, and I think you are as well, we're kind of presenting a pathway into these sports that like a mature adult with a fully developed, like kind of like frontal cortex
and financial picture.
That's gonna try, and financial picture, but like that's gonna try to make decisions with a relatively high level of safety. And like that's always what I want to encourage. At the same time, there is a place for like hanging it out there, right? And neither of us would be where we are today without having taken some pretty outsized like swings at big objectives that were probably outside of our skill set. And so, I think I just want to acknowledge that, of course, that's a part of this too, depending on how big your dreams are and how hard you're pushing. And like my 20-something-year-old self chose a totally different risk profile in order to, as I was choosing, this was going to be my passion in my life and that I was willing to take really outsized risks of like actually getting myself killed to move forward in this sport. That is also going to be a part of some people's pathways. And I'm not here to say that's wrong. It's just like, I think most people getting in the sport are not looking to, have a very realistic chance of not coming home from their weekend adventure. So I think what we're doing here is speaking more to that perspective. Like we want to come home. We recognize there are going to be limits on our, like how much risk we should take as we're building skills in these sports. That's not to take away from the, this other subset that's maybe on a different pathway. I think it's okay that exists, but that's not exactly what we're speaking to.
Yeah. And I think on that note, I think it's important to spend time with your risk tolerance and understand what makes risk. And so I talk a lot about risk as a combination of hazard and consequence. You can have the same level of risk is either high hazard and low consequence or high consequence and low hazard. And so understanding that and then spending time with it and figuring out where your comfort level lies is really important in managing it. It's really hard to manage risk if you don't understand your own relationship with it, but also in identifying the right mentors, the right partners, the right guides, etc. It's important to know where you stand so that you can find someone comparable, because I think some of the biggest challenges in the mountains come when you have two people with different risk tolerances try and work together as a team. In your experience, how does that end up?
Yeah, I mean, for me, one of the hardest parts of being in this sport, and I think it's true for most people in these sports, whether it's climbing or skiing or big mountains, or it is finding the right partners. And partners are so difficult because it's so difficult to align so many different pieces: schedule, health, fitness, work, actual goals, desires, what drives us the most. But one of the single biggest components of finding the right partners, I think, is actually aligning risk, kind of like understanding of risk and risk goals. And it doesn't need to be exactly the same, because I think that almost never exists. But I think finding partners that are able to have these conversations about risk and actually have some like both experience around risk, and also like, maybe it's mental health to be actually able to speak to risk realistically. It's so important to build that relationship before going to a mountain objective with meaningful risk. And I think it's often forgotten and missed. But it sort of in this episode of like how to build experience, it all just comes once again with time of going through experiences with mountain guides, just as much as with like people from the community, where you're learning how to speak about these things, learning how to analyze risk, and then figuring out for yourself where you kind of sit on the spectrum. And that it changes constantly, right? Like, where you are today is not where you'll be in 6 months. It's not where you were 3 years ago, because so many things go into that. And often I think we as partners, we might, as individuals, we might think we're in one place and then find out we're in another. So all that to say, it's a hard piece of climbing. It takes time. I do think like this is another place where actually climbing with mountain guides can often be easier in some ways if you have the ability than finding that perfectly aligned person from the outside. Of course, mountain guides, since this is their professional work, they're going to have more schedule freedom. They're also going to be more able to understand and change the dial on their risk to align with their client and objective versus a personal risk tolerance, which might be more like, this is my time off. This is where I'm at. This is what I want to go achieve. And, probably the biggest part of mountain guiding, of becoming a mountain guide through like the AMGA, IFMGA system, is actually understanding risk and being able to manage and mitigate it. I would say that's probably 70 or 80% of the training, with like the actual technical parts being 20 or 30%. So a mountain guide has dedicated years of their life to kind of building this skill set, which is very rare in the average consumer of outdoor experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've talked about a lot of different aspects of getting into climbing, but I think what people often are looking for is kind of like, what's the path? Give me the path. Give me the A plus B equals C. And so I'm going to attempt to summarize what we've talked about, and feel free to chime in. So I think the most important thing to start is identify what your end goal is. If you want to be a big wall rock climber in Yosemite, you shouldn't go to a climbing school in Ecuador. It's a different type of climbing. And similarly, if you want to climb 8,000 meter peaks, you shouldn't necessarily go spend 6 months climbing in Yosemite Valley. While it wouldn't hurt, it's not necessarily additive to your end goal. So identifying your end goal, where you want to end up, and if it's all encompassing, I would say start with one part of climbing and master it, and then move on to another.
Yeah, I was going to add really quickly, like maybe don't define your end goal, define your first goal. Like, what is it that got you excited to try climbing? You have a first goal, start there.
And I guess what I meant by end goal was like, what style are we trying to get into? Because climbing is increasingly diversifying. You could be within rock climbing, you could be a boulderer, you could be a big wall climber, you could be a free soloist, and they're all going to have this little bit of a different style to it. So identify, what type of climbing you want to get into. And then from there, I think across all the types of climbing, it's pretty universal. Like get outside hiking, get outside trail running, get outside on a via ferrata, experience exposure. That's going to work for all types of climbing. Experience uneven terrain, whether you're, a sport climber or a big mountain climber climbing 8,000 meter peaks, having that comfort in uneven terrain, being able to move efficiently and without, expelling tons of energy in simple kind of uneven terrain is going to benefit you. And then from there, I think it's about getting those early experiences and finding finding mentors. So finding a partner or finding a guide that you can work with on this goal. How are we doing there?
I think you've done great so far. If I was to throw in another piece, of course, fitness just makes this all more fun. And that is something that you can build in the gym if that's what you have the ability to do. Again, I totally agree with what you said, get outside. Like there's nowhere on earth almost where you can't get outside and do a workout if you're willing to suffer. And so I do think getting outside is really key and just builds so much more than a treadmill or a Stairmaster or weights or, core classes. But general fitness will help across all of these things. So don't let your fitness stop you from getting outside and trying these things, whether it's a first time climbing or hiking or whatever it might be. But alongside building that experience, putting time into general fitness is going to help.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then from there, I think it's about starting to level up your objectives, right? And so to be a good climber, you can't always climb the same thing over and over. You can't always climb the same grade or the same style. And you have to challenge yourself. And, as we talked about, challenging yourself in the right environments, whether that's with the right partner who maybe has a little more experience or with a mountain guide, but continuing to level up. And that's where building those relationships, having that teamwork, experience really, really helps. And I think regardless of if you go the mountain guiding route or you go the mentor route or you figure it out on your own, identifying the points in which you are kind of group leading or you are following. And even with a mountain guide, you can still be in kind of more of a group leading mentor type role, but picking objectives where it's appropriate for you to be in the lead making decisions and picking objectives where it's appropriate for you to be following. And maybe the terrain is within your wheelhouse, but the risk management is not, I think is a super important thing to acknowledge. And as you build, the harder objectives are going to be something you want to follow, and the easier objectives are going to be something you have the opportunity to lead. And experiencing both is important to being a good climber. You can't be a good climber if you're always, just following someone better than you.
Absolutely. Hands down.
Awesome. All right. So final parting message for someone, just go do it.
I mean, that exactly. Like even as we're speaking about this, I'm like, dang, did we just make it sound intimidating? So my final message would be like, I mean, if you found our podcast, you obviously have interest in these things. And actually, I think there is a lot to be said with like online resources today. YouTube channels, I'll plug mine, Danger Stick TV, and Alpenglow Expeditions is YouTube channel. But there's YouTube channels, there's podcasts like ours, like Climbing Gold, more on the rock climbing side. Dirtbag Diaries. Freedom of the Hills is this classic book. Get it in hardcover like I did. There's so many resources to just start dreaming. There's so many great mainstream films out there about climbing now, both mountains and rock. Of course, also on the skiing side. So like start inundating yourself with content for sure. Hopefully that's an exciting way to feel some connection. And then, don't be intimidated to just go and have a first experience. And I think we've listed 3 ways to do that aren't just like hiking or trail running or things like that in your local park. Like mountain guide companies like ours, like our intro to mountaineering course and our intro to rock climbing class are truly for real beginners. They're a day long. The Via Ferrata is a half day long. Those are 2 experiences at our guide company and other guide companies out there where you can just get a taste and see if it's as exciting as you think it will be. Just commit and go and do those things. They're not cheap, but they're much cheaper than going to Mount Everest, let's say. And so that's one path. Or choose a festival and go same thing, intro type class at an ice climbing festival or a rock climbing festival or like a hiking type festival, hiking, trail running, things like that. Or join a club, which we've mentioned a few different ones. And I was just thinking of things like the Reno Alpine Club. And I was just at the New York Mountaineers Club and we did a run in Central Park, but there was like 800 members in the club. And they're like going out and doing hikes in the Hudson Valley and and putting together groups to go to real mountains. So clubs or festivals, or my preference always mountain guide companies, go and have that first taste. Don't be intimidated. Don't worry about fitness. Don't worry about whether you've checked off these boxes yet about being efficient on your feet. Go out and have an experience. See if you like it. I promise at the very least, you'll be welcomed into this community.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would also say, don't be afraid to realize that you don't like it, because I think it's okay to acknowledge that this outdoor adventure, this, borderline suffering isn't for everyone. And if you realize that like what you saw on Instagram isn't something that you're actually into doing, that's okay. But now you know. So go out, get that experience, have some fun with it, and make a decision about what's your next step.
Yeah, absolutely. And, because like this was my experience, but also I want Alpenglow to stay in business, maybe give it 3 or 5 tries before you decide you don't like it. Like to me, I think my experience with surfing is probably been my closest analogy to many people's, experiences in climbing. Like it is just hard. And actually, to your point of like the Instagram thing, like the photo on the wave where you look perfect and you're barreled, maybe our equivalent is being on the mountain of your dreams, after sending in perfect style and watching sunrise, feeling great. Like the vast majority of the time, mountaineering and climbing is not going to feel like that. Surfing is not going to look like that. You're basically just paddling, getting the shit kicked out of you with, trying to survive the whitewater, like to get out to the break. Like that's also true in our sport. Like my first, I guess this got maybe finish on a story. My first time, as I think my first time high altitude climbing in Ecuador when I was 17 years old. My first mountain, I just made every mistake possible and hated every single minute of it. I was so sick. I was so broken. My ego was crushed into the tiniest little pieces of sand from the entire experience. And I came down and was like, I never want to do that again. And luckily had a mountain guide that was like, perfect, don't ever do it again, but stay and experience this place that you're in, instead of going home tomorrow on the flight like you want to. And I stayed, and the pain and suffering faded, and the joy remained. And 5 days later, I summited my second big peak in much better style, and realized, I wanted to build my life on this. And so be humble to the fact that these things take time to actually maybe to have the joy versus suffering coefficient get to the place we all hope it can be.
Absolutely. No, it's a process, and it's a great way to spend your time. So I encourage people to get out and try it.
Absolutely. Me too. And
right.
And utilize us, the Duffel Shuffle, for questions. Sam is ready for all of your questions. Send them in the comments on YouTube, and send them by email, send them by Instagram. We'd love to hear, what questions this leads to, or your experiences in the mountains and how you got into it.
Absolutely. All right. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Sam.
Thanks for listening to the Duffel Shuffle podcast. You can follow along on Instagram, where we post our favorite clips from each episode, as well as more about the world of climbing, skiing, and mountaineering. If you haven't already, please subscribe, rate us, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Catch you next time, and until then, we hope you enjoy some time outside.